Thomas was an engine who lived at the big station. He had 6 small wheels, a short stumpy funnel, a short stumpy boiler and a short stumpy dome. He was a fussy little engine, always pulling coaches about. He was a cheeky little engine too. He thought no engine worked as hard as he did, so he used to play tricks on them.
Hello everyone! Welcome back to another episode of NIKO'S Customs, and the first episode of this series in 2025. Now, a lot of you are probably wondering where the Fergus Spotlight episode is, as I had made a poll to see who you wanted to be the next one to be shown in an episode. And to answer that question, it's still on the way. I've just decided to push it back to episode 12 so that I could shed some light on a very special custom to celebrate the 80th anniversary. And as you've already seen beforehand and in the title, we'll be taking a look at my custom Broomstick Thomas model. But first, a little history on this version of Thomas. Way before we had the Thomas we know and love today, he originally looked like this. In 1942, Wilbur Audrey would make Christopher a wooden model of an 060 tank engine, painted it blue, and gave it to his son as a Christmas present. Christopher would christen the model with the name Thomas. For the illustrations of the second book, Reginald Payne was provided sketches by Audrey as a guide for the illustrations. However, instead of illustrating Thomas the way Audrey intended, Payne would illustrate Thomas as an E2 tank engine, as Payne was a Southern man and therefore based Thomas off a Southern engine. Although Audrey was annoyed by the change, he was content after finding out the design was based on a real locomotive, and so he decided to keep Thomas in E2. When it came to building this model, I was struggling on what exactly I wanted to use for him. I originally planned on making him using a Trackmaster 2 Thomas, but decided against it. I then thought of using a spare Playrail/Tomy Thomas, as I had a few lying around, but I just wasn't completely satisfied with it. However, sometime around late 2023, I had purchased 3 motorized All Engines Go Trackmasters, those being Gordon, Nia, and of course, Thomas. Now, some of you are probably wondering why on earth I went with this version of Thomas to use as the basis for this custom out of all the other ones. Well, I had 2 reasons for that. 1, the All Engines Go tank engine models are much shorter in length compared to a regular Trackmaster tank engine, which I preferred. And 2, the model already had a flat running board, which made my job so much easier when it came to shaping the model. Not to mention the wheels fit the criteria I was looking for. Also, yes, I am aware that these models are rather tall compared to the regular Trackmaster, Playrail, and Tomy models, but I didn't mind as I don't plan on having this model run alongside Murdoch, Hank, or any other engines. This was simply made to be a little novelty to celebrate the 80th. So with all that out of the way, let's discuss the build process. The first thing I did was getting the All Engines Go Thomas and taking things off that were screwed on, like the whistle and cutting off the face to remove the original smoke box. I then proceeded to cut off the top of the cab and cutting off a good chunk of the bunker, as I was going to completely scratch build it later. As for the smoke box, I wanted to use something that was more reasonably sized, and considering I had already drawn some faces based on the illustrations of this version of Thomas for my regular model, I wanted something to fit them. So after searching for a spare smoke box, I found one that I had originally used for a Timothy the Ghost Engine model I made many years ago. Side note, I'm not a total fan of Timothy, and so I have no plans on ever making another one. Just thought I'd mention that. Anyways, since I now had a smoke box, I decided to cut out a hole for where the boiler would go, as I planned on scratch building it later on. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention the chassis. So I originally was going to use the Thomas chassis, but I made a small mistake, which was cutting down the height of the switch. I'll get into why that was an issue in a bit. So once everything was cut, I sanded the model down until he was nice and smooth. Now came the time to begin shaping the model. I first began with the bunker, as that was the easiest part to do, but after that I began to shape the tanks and boiler using cardboard. For the funnel, I cut down a wooden dowel to a reasonable size and glued it onto the model, as I thought it would match the original model just as well. By the way, this is the same method I use when making taller funnels, like for my Fergus and Neil model. For the dome, I used an All Engines Go Neo one, as the original Thomas one was just too small to use. I then glued magnets to the smoke box so he could have interchangeable expressions. Back to the chassis, when it came to building the cab, I realized that the switch would be way too small to use and that it would be a struggle just to turn the engine on and off. I also didn't want to shorten the cab as I didn't want it to become squished like the Trackmaster 2 Thomas. So I just decided to use my Gordon chassis instead, since the switch was still the same as before. The only thing I had to fix on the Gordon chassis was giving it a coupling. So I just gave him Thomas's and he was done. And if you're wondering why I went with Gordon's chassis instead of Nia's, let's just say it's easier painting blue on top of blue, as I don't use a primer most of the time for models. But anyways, once the cab and chassis issue was sorted, I added some cold detail by using hot glue and made a small whistle with a matchstick. For painting, I decided to make a custom color that matched the original model's tealish blue livery. Once I was satisfied with the color, I got to work and painted him up. Then, using a toothpick, I painted the lining, lettering, and a number 1 on the sides. The small bit of the running board was painted black, the buffer beam was painted red on the front and back, and the buffers were painted silver. The smoke box, coal in the bunker, cab windows, and doors were all painted black, and as for the little whistle, I painted it up in gold. I should also mention that I decided not to paint back cab windows, since the original didn't have any. For the face, the first two that are pretty similar were based on these two illustrations. The first being based on the original drawing of Thomas, and the other being the same thing, just with a smile like how it appeared in the special Thomas and the Royal Engine. They were pretty easy to draw since, come on, it's not that hard to draw eyes, a nose, and a smile on one of them. And the third face was based off of this specific illustration of Thomas, where I believe he's at the big station in his first book. I really liked this cheeky and happy expression he had, so I decided to draw it, and I absolutely love how it looks on him. Lastly, the wheels were painted the same color as the body, with a small silver circle painted in the center to act like the screws that were used to hold the wheels in. Fun fact, this design choice was mostly based on the original wooden railway version of this variant of Thomas. Okay, now that we've talked about the model in its entirety, we'll just quickly go over the rolling stock. Now, there's not much to say on these models as they were really simple. For the coach, all I did was take my old branchline coach model, which was a Trackmaster 2 Clarabelle, and painted the letterings onto it. As for the truck, I grabbed a spare Trackmaster 2 truck I had lying around, cleaned it up, primed it, and painted it in the same red as the buffer beam. I then painted on the details to match the original model and used a toothpick to paint the lettering. And with that, he was done. Now let's see this guy in action. So that was my custom Broomstick Thomas model. I actually don't really have any issues with this model, as I'm quite happy overall with the end result. But if I had to think of one thing I'm not too pleased about, it would be that he's still a bit too tall, and it's apparent when he's next to his rolling stock and the rest of the engines in my collection. However, I don't care. He was mainly built to just be this special little model to celebrate the franchise's 80th anniversary, and I just love him so much. I think he's the perfect model to have made to celebrate this milestone for the little blue tank engine. But anyways, that's all from me. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye!